I actually went out and got on my bike.
Did? How was it?
I needed help.
Oh, well, that's not bad.
But once I get on, it felt comfortable, so
Yeah.
I will be able to ride.
Well, that's good.
Will the heat be working tonight or not?
I knew I was.
Oh.
I don't know.
But you know what? I was right. Right.
We keep the heat way down. People will hurry up.
I know, it hasn't worked yet though, John. I guess.
That was a joke.
I know. I mean,
Always.
could be a
I'm a
truist.
quick smart guy.
Big group.
Are your boards ready? All your boards and everything ready? Did you just pop in a moment ago? Okay, I had my head down, I guess, I didn't see it.
Oh no. Oh no.
All right.
Wake her up.
He'll be here.
Jason, we're gonna go in this room once we decide.
The two of you.
Oh. Close meeting with. Oh, no,
No.
it's open. Oh, that's right, it is. an
Just
meeting.
open
I'm
meeting,
sorry, I
open.
forgot.
Yeah, open meeting.
Oh, but we're gonna hold it out.
Yeah, studies. And then we have another one right afterward about the animals. And then the regular meeting.
I did work out the other close.
You love to get a shake. John. Yeah. I was
6 o'clock.
Call the study session of December 2nd to order. If I could have, well, if everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, if I could have roll call, please.
Councilpersons Breeding. Present. Higgins. Kelsey.
Here.
Parkinson.
Here.
Ross. Here. Salcido.
Present.
And Mayor Carnes.
Here. All right, well, good evening, everyone. Study session we have today is in reference to retaining outside counsel for marijuana ordinance. As you know, this is, there are many possible pitfalls that one could get involved in if they don't do things the right way, and that's what we're looking to make sure that everything is done in a fair and the right way to do things. So today we have the Clark Hill Law Firm. You're a representative of that, I would imagine. Then come on up, sir, and introduce yourself. And
And Your Honor, may I give some introductory statements before Mr. Canvasser addresses the council?
absolutely,
All
sir.
right, thank you. Following the election, the city clerk and I, the next day, were barraged probably 30, 40 phone calls each from individuals who think, not even reading the ballot language, that they have a hook for coming into Lincoln Park to locate one of the businesses that's allowed under the statute. We looked at the state statute, the city clerk and I examined the ballot issue that was passed and decided that this would be best reflected in bringing an outside counsel to advise the council on what type of ordinance is necessary to meet the dictates of the voters' mandate. And it's further predicated by the problem that all of us have been here all of our lives, and I'm sure that each one of you have gotten at least a call, and if you haven't, then obviously you got an unlisted phone number, because even today, I've gotten calls, and Mr. Canvasser and I have spoke since Election Day, from somebody who says they're representing Big Tobacco, who wants to bring big bucks into Lincoln Park to do this business, and this is not the end. This is just the beginning of what the little guy and the big guy see as a mother lode. You saw what it was going like during the election. It's in your interest to do the ordinance properly, based on the voters' mandate, to keep the restrictions that give you the security and the protection that you need. Secondly, it's in your interest to avoid the pitfalls of the past by bringing in outside counsel to do it, so there will be no claim that the city exercised any particular favoritism in either the designing of the ordinance or in the setting up the parameters for the businesses. That doesn't mean that Mrs. Higgins, who quite frankly was against the ballot initiative, nor I, and I took no position on it, would not be involved with Mr. Canvasser, but we need the outside look of someone who's not only had the experience but does not have the lengthy ties to the community where anything would be subject to question. And it also takes the load off of you as counsel. I want to further advise the council that in my diligence with this firm, I discovered that one of the public officials has a relative who has a minor position working at the law firm, not a lawyer, but will not be attached to doing this work here. It happens to be the council president's daughter. I've reviewed it. There's no conflict. There's nothing that needs to be disclosed beyond that, that she's not being paid by the city. She's not an employee. I would doubt that she would ever influence what her mother has done in her entire life, including voting on this ordinance here. So, Mrs. Breeding, I think by me disclosing it, I think I've done fairly what you have to do under the ethics ordinance. You have a relative who works for the Clark Hill firm.
Thank you.
Not as a position of an attorney, though, so you should know that it's not an attorney. And Mr. Canvasser will indicate that he's had acquaintances with the daughter, because although it's a large firm, they have an office downtown, and they happen to work in the same office. You should know that. That has nothing to do on my recommendation of this law firm. I would think that if you're looking at the right firm that's close enough, that's represented both sides, marijuana industry and municipalities, that this would be the best firm to go to. If you didn't get the cheap rates that I would get as city attorney, I'd recommend you hire them as a city attorney firm. They're a good law firm in what they do. They understand municipal law. So I think it goes without question that you should consider his presentation, the recommendation. His rates are right in line with everyone else, and he's offered a municipal discount to the city. I think you should move forward. The other thing I'm going to advise, because Mr. Canvasser is more skilled in this field, I think he'll tell you that if you get a call from another business, you don't take their call. If you haven't gotten any calls, I'm shocked, because we've all gotten calls every day. They need to be referred to him or to me or to someone else, because people will still think you can exert influence. Every business owner on Papless Drive and along 4th Street, and folks who own property everywhere, have called the clerk almost every day trying to find out when they can get in. We've done the easy dodge by telling them to go to the building department and pick up the zoning ordinance. But at some point, Mr. Canvasser needs to know who's out there and who's beating the bushes, because the city's going to do this thing properly under the statute and under the ordinances that they'll adopt. I think I've said enough. I hope I covered it all, Mr. Canvasser.
Very good, thank you, I appreciate it, and thanks for having me here today. So, correct, I do have an acquaintance with Council President's daughter. She's not an attorney at the law firm of Clark Hill, and she won't have any involvement in actually doing any of the work relating to the drafting of an ordinance. So, the ballot was proposed, it was passed, and so we have certain guidelines that need to be adhered to. And in order to, there's always going to be pitfalls in this industry. It's a new industry, it's an emerging industry. Virtually every city who's passed an ordinance has had to deal with some kind of litigation at the back end. There is no fail-safe process that's been demonstrated so far. But I think what we can do is we can take some of those lessons learned in other communities and try to put forth the best possible, tightest ordinance and try to avoid outside influences, because there's going to be a number of people who want these licenses. That's the reality of the situation. If there's a situation where it's first come, first serve, they're going to be lining up. If it's a merit-based and they don't get those points, they're going to be saying that they should be entitled to those points. So those are some of the considerations in terms of thinking about it from the back end forward. And please interrupt me at any point if you have any questions, but maybe I should tell you a little bit about myself. I've provided a Clark Hill and cannabis industry experience packet specifically for the city of Lincoln Park. I'm a partner at the law firm at Clark Hill. I'm based in Detroit. I've been with the law firm for going on 7.5 years. Graduated from Wayne State Law School in 2006. Before that, I went to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where I graduated with an undergraduate degree in political science. My cannabis industry experience kind of came about unintentionally. I started doing liquor licensing work about 9 years ago, and that deals with LARA, and I dealt with the licensing aspect of it, and I dealt with the enforcement aspect of it and the compliance aspect of it. I also do a lot of zoning work. I sit on my local municipality's Board of Zoning Appeals. So I've gone in front of boards of zoning appeals to ask for variances and land uses, and I've been on the other side granting them or denying them. And so when the cannabis industry first started exploding a couple of years ago, one of the firm's clients was involved in the city of Detroit's voter initiative. And my partner who was working on it at that time brought me in based on the experience. And it's kind of become a organically grown and created a life unto it itself, given the similarities between the liquor licensing aspect of it and the way Lara has been dealing with it. So I've dealt with it on both sides. I've sued municipalities. I've helped people get their licenses. I've dealt with denials. We've advised municipalities in terms of appropriate compliance. So I have seen it from both angles. We're facing a little bit of a nuance here because this is at a time where we're not only looking at medical, but we're also looking at recreational, and that's something that's going to have to be considered as well. But I hope that I can guide you through that, come up with language, and while working together, we can come up with an ordinance that will be best suited for the interests of everybody to make this a fair and equal process. I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, as we're going through, because I understand that in choosing who gets the licenses, a blind draw isn't appropriate. And from what you're saying, that there are problems with the merit, as far as points being awarded and such. Well, what are the different types of processes that could be used for to determine who would get the license?
Yeah, I think you have your merit-based system, set of criteria that's set forth in the application, and generally it's a city clerk that grades that, or it's an outside consulting firm that grades those applications, and then they're awarded points. And here we're talking about 2 provisioning centers and retail facilities, just by way of an example. So the question becomes, do you have to have a medical license to also be a rec seller? Are we going to stack those and make them one and the same, or are we going to make them different? So those are considerations we'll have to work through, but ultimately it's a merit-based system. One of them is a merit-based system, and the top points win, and the other applications won't be awarded unless for some reason those top point getters weren't qualified from a state level or some had other disqualified factors. That system, I've seen frequent litigation in regards to the people who don't get those points, challenging, why didn't I get a point here? Did they get a point? They got a point there. So why isn't it even? There's a lot of subjectivity that goes into it because you're looking at somebody's business plan, for example, and saying, all right, I like your business plan and you get 5 out of 5 points, and your business plan is so you get 4 out of 5 points. Or you're going to, it's very subjective. There is a combination of merit and kind of a draw out of a hat. These are the applicants that are qualified, and we're going to pick at random. And then there's kind of the take your number approach where first come, first qualified gets the licenses, and then down the road we go. Like I said, there's no fail-safe way to do it. There's no way that's going to ensure with 100% accuracy that there won't be a lawsuit by the losers of it. But I would probably try to steer you away from a strictly subjective point-based system so that we can try to lessen that risk.
If we were to retain you, you'd do a sample ordinance and then discuss back and forth in order to get the final product?
Correct. We would probably have a couple sessions, whether they were a closed door, open door, we'd have to leave the city attorney, but talk about what we want to see, fees, for example, fines for failure to comply, a number of other things that we'd have to work through. We draft up a sample ordinance, and we wouldn't be starting from scratch, as there's a number of ordinances out there. We've, like I said, have drafted some ourselves, so we could take some of the things that we've found to be most effective in other municipalities and try to create one. And then we may have to go through some different iterations, make sure we're complying with the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, and going through the appropriate processes to make sure that with any other ordinance, it would be reviewed, commented on, and then pass appropriately.
Has your firm done this for other communities?
Yes, we have. I don't have a list, I'm sorry, off the top of my head.
You're fine.
Okay.
What,
It'll save money on just pasting it. Well, they used to call it cut and paste, now it's just.
There's a lot of cut
copy
and paste,
or
yeah.
something.
in starting, we saw that it was legal to sell today. Obviously, we're a little bit behind in the process here, but what would our timeline be from point A to where we would start issuing licenses? If you-
That's something we would have to work with. I mean, normally, part of that is how long is the period going to be for applications? 21 days is probably something I'd recommend. And then depending on how the review process is gonna work, how long is it going to take to review those applications?
And this would be after we got the ordinance in place?
Correct.
Okay.
In terms of how long is it gonna take to get the ordinance passed, initial drafts won't take very long. We can have something done in a matter of weeks. Obviously, with the holidays, it gets to be a difficult time for meetings and everything like that, but
If we were to proceed, though, if we had the draft, then we would need at least one study session before it would be considered to be placed for the first and second reading, and then we'd have the third reading. So we're talking a couple months anyway, right?
yeah, it's not gonna be something that happens overnight.
I gotcha. I didn't mean to monopolize this. Anybody have?
I have a question. Because you dealt with liquor licenses, in the past, we had available liquor licenses, and so the city would determine above all others, you could fill out an application and you'd be granted that above all others. And it became very political. And so if in fact you were very connected, then you could get one of these above all others, other than, outside of the other 7 that were there or whatever. So I want to make sure that we're not going to go through a process where it's political, that we pick and choose because we like John, or whatever. So I just want us to be very cautious on that. And one other thing, I know that Ann Arbor is the first one to sell, and obviously they have many licenses that they've issued in Ann Arbor. I'm one of the people who did not appreciate having dispensaries. Grow facility, fine, but dispensaries are just against my heart. But anyways, in Ann Arbor, I'm afraid that if we cut and paste theirs, if we use their sample, it may be too loose to where it really would expand, allowing, I have no idea. I haven't seen Ann Arbor's. I'm sure they're not by churches and schools and, public parks or whatever, but I want us to be very cautious that the ones that we approve, the locations we approve, the ordinance is written so that it's not every John that can come in and put one beside the other or whatever. So that's just
Mayor,
my-
she raises a good point. May I address something here with Mr. Canvasser? Mr. Canvasser, the point she raises is that this is some specific zone that was approved by the voters, and I think that bespeaks a fear of the council that a twist in the ordinance could expand it beyond the parameters and geographic boundaries of the industrial park, which is where the voters decided they wanted it located. And that's why the concern about dispensaries comes, retail establishments, and a lot of the calls city clerk has gotten were for places on Ford Street. And someone else is talking about the Sears Plaza would be an ideal place for this to go. And I think we all could concede that council could pretty much do whatever they want with an ordinance, but they've got a specific mandate from the voters. And if it's your intent to stay within the voters' mandate and their guidelines, let him know that ahead of time so he doesn't go beyond what you want here. And that's why you need to bring in experienced counsel to keep it narrow and not succumb to any outside pressure. Would you agree?
Yeah, and the voters were very specific. They approved it in the general industrial district, and they approved a specific amount. I think your concern about placement is appropriate. We still have to be cognizant of the federal drug-free zone act, making sure we're not too close to schools and playgrounds and some of those other defined locations that are considered drug-free zones.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, Mayor.
That's all right, Ed. Anyone else?
I got a. Mr. Chair, how many other cities have this ordinance? Do you know of any? You say you've dealt with many of them?
How many have recreational or medicinal ordinances?
Recreational.
Ann Arbor for sure, obviously. I'm
Not
not
sure what they have in Detroit, I'm not sure.
Detroit is in a state of flux because Detroit had a date specific where they had to opt out. The way the recreational ordinance was drafted was you were considered opted in unless you specifically opted out. And you had a date certain where, and I forget, it was somewhere early November, where you had to elect to opt out. Detroit waited a few days after that deadline passed to opt out, and certain people submitted applications in those 4 days or so, that gap period. And so what's going to happen with that still remains to be seen. I think Detroit's still contemplating what's going to happen. I think, generally speaking, most municipalities are kind of waiting to see how this plays out, have opted out, and then, may at some point opt in.
Well, in the news, I've noticed there's about 4 or 5 other communities. Some of them are up north. I think Macomb was mentioned in one of them. If you're going to write this, you're going to get samples of their ordinances so we can look through them.
Sure, absolutely.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Got a question through the chair, if I might.
go ahead.
Obviously, this is new territory, and our famous legislators made all the rules and regulations, so your job should be really easy, because I'm sure they spelled it all out in the act when they were up there litigating all this stuff back and forth. That's just a little joke there, it's not.
No, but I mean, you're right.
Obviously, it's not been, because that's why you're here,
No, but they've helped with create, the definitions and
Right.
things that
Right.
we don't have to come up with the definition of what's a retail location.
Right.
Yeah.
My question is that obviously we're gonna have if we get a good contract with you, is it gonna be like open-ended until in other words, are you gonna be like a retainer? Or, what I'm saying is obviously you're gonna be looking at the ordinances, and my question is that, when you do the ordinances and stuff like that, there's gonna be other issues that come up, I guess. Is that just to write the ordinances, or just to advise us on other issues concerning the marijuana industry? Or, I guess I'm looking for, is it just to do the ordinance to cover the referendum that was done by the voters? Or is there more to it in your representation to us, I guess is what I'm looking for. Oh, okay. Well, I should just have Ed up there, maybe. I'm just,
So you don't put Mr. Canvas on the spot.
Yeah.
The first thing, Councilman, and it merits concern here, is just to get the ordinance that's proper, you're comfortable with, and we address those regulatory issues as they come up afterwards. We need to get the ordinance on the books, passed, and continue through. This will not be a long, it's not gonna be a 6-year project, but it's gonna be 6 months, I would think, at least, to get this done. And they've quoted an hourly rate. I think you probably want to retain them at an hourly rate, and you've got sufficient staff here with the city attorney's office to work on the other issues, to work the bugs out. And the rate, I think, is quite fair compared to what other firms were paying. When we had emergency manager, we were paying much more an hour than that for his lawyers here. So I don't think it's a bad rate. And
I have one more
we'll
question.
monitor it. They've always, as practice, they've sent me the bills, I reviewed them and sent them to Ms. Griggs, and she looks them over before they're submitted to council for payment anyway, so. But merits response, and I don't think we should anticipate the other problems until we get an ordinance on the books, and then we'll see if we want to keep them on retainer or on call.
Well,
I'm
that's-
sure they'll be glad to be on call,
I
Councilman.
guess my question is through the chair to the thing is that I can't okay something that has an open-ended thing to it. I don't know how much, I think some of the stuff, isn't it 5,000 we have a limit, then we have to go out to bid for? Giving somebody, without some kind of idea what I'm paying, I'm kind of, this is taxpayer money, it's not my money. That's why I was asking for some kind of rough idea, and I think you mentioned something to that. But what I'm getting at is that usually the process, unfortunately, gets a little dragged out because this is new territory we're going to, and even though we cut and paste, they're not all exactly the same depending where you're at. There's zoning ordinances and everything else that goes into it. And that was my question, is that I would like to have some kind of rough dollar figure, and then it comes back to us to where we reauthorize the money, because otherwise it's just an open-ended check, and I have a problem with that. That's all I'm saying. I know that you can't put a dollar figure, but I'd like to have a dollar figure that after a certain period of time that comes back to the council to talk about the money. Otherwise, we just keep writing checks. And even though it goes to Ed, and I love you, Ed, it still goes to the pay, you know, Lisa to pay, and we still have to account for it. That was my question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but somewhere along the line, if I'm paying for a service from a lawyer, it's gonna cost me X amount of money or a retainer, and then after that, I pay more. And that's what I'm looking at. Maybe that shouldn't be a discussion for here, but to me, as a fiduciary of the city, I have to ask is, you know, how much am I gonna pay, or where do I start relooking at the bill and asking where I'm going from there? That's where I'm at, that's all.
Well, I think that'll be
I don't know how that works.
addressed
Your
when
Honor.
we would talk at the regular meeting, when the resolution comes up,
Okay.
what is the compensation is going to be. I imagine there's a certain fee per hour or work or to retain them.
Mm-hmm.
The city's discount.
Yeah, he has it listed. There is the list of what the fees are, depending on who works for them. I would take this as it would be for the attorneys that handle our flood litigation and any type of special needs that we have here.
Your Honor, during the break, I'll check with Mr. Canvasser, so he need not hang around unless you have other questions for the public meeting, to see if there's some certain fee, which would be an initial amount not to exceed subject to further approval, and that works, because he's in the middle of an ordinance, and it's gonna be more than $5,000, I assure you of that, but it would be like any professional services contract with an engineering firm, a consulting firm, with Plant Moran, the other firms there. They give you an idea what they're gonna charge, and if they go beyond, it's always subject to council approving and auditing.
Yeah, we want to go in with eyes wide open.
Yeah.
That's all. It's not.
That's fine with you, Your Honor, that's all you know, and the other question is that because this is brand new, and because of the fact that we're creating an ordinance that has some legislative bullets to it, I'm sure we're gonna steal from the legislators, okay, is that why didn't they put any kind of way of doing the licensings? In other words, they're up there, you know, they knew this was gonna come. What I'm trying to say is we're talking about cut and paste. Is there anything that the legislative officials put in there about how these licenses would be distributed? I mean, I'm not sure if Laura has it. I think you gotta go in front of them, but besides that, is there a thing, or the municipality is around their own which way we wanna go? Is how we offer them or how we distribute them, I guess is what I'm saying. Or is there anything?
I mean, Lara doesn't have anything in that regard that I'm aware of. I think the Michigan Municipal League has some forms and samples, but I'm not aware of anybody coming out and saying, look, this is the best way to do it.
That's what I was kinda asking.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're kinda, through the chair, you're just kinda like feeling your way through it, then basically is what we're doing, to a certain extent.
Learning by other
Yeah,
municipalities'
that's what I-
mistakes,
that's
yeah.
what I was trying to say. All right, that's all I have, Your Honor, thank you.
Main thing is to get it right.
Yep.
So if we spend some time up front and spend some money up front, then as opposed to paying it in the back end to someone through litigation, which usually ends up being quite a lot more, that probably would be a good thing.
I have one more question
Yep.
for the chair, if I may.
Well, we have, but before we do it, I want, those that haven't had an opportunity, do you have? Okay, then go ahead, Donna.
On zoning, will he be working on the changes of the zoning ordinance also? Because,
It depends if there is a necessity and what the necessity is, and we'll work with him on that.
okay.
He's got a lower hourly rate for that.
So I would imagine it's the whole picture, it's
Yeah.
the whole package though,
Yeah, I
because
was
we
just
don't
gonna-
want,
yeah.
because if we have this and then there's problems in the zoning that we didn't anticipate, that's
Yeah, I
probably,
mean, you're
were we
right.
to go with you, that's what we're looking for on that, to see if there's gonna be, not only with what the ordinance is going to be, but is there other problems
Conflicts.
with our conflicts with our ordinances?
Right,
As
yeah,
in existence, our other ordinances, but
right, making sure that not only we're drafting something, but it's fitting
Yeah.
harmoniously with the rest of your ordinance, exactly.
okay, very good.
One last question, Your Honor, because you got more business here.
Yes, we do.
Would council concur that in the event you decide you're gonna retain Mr. Canvasser's firm here today, that he should be the initial point of contact if inquiries come to the police department, who's probably tired of getting the calls now, to the building department, and to the city clerk's office? They refer them, or they take the numbers, and he'll decide if he needs to call them or not, because you're all going to get more calls after this. Would-be developers, would-be entrepreneurs, and people just interested, and it's unfair to burden all those departments. I don't think you should speak with them. Pass the number either to me or the city clerk will get it to Mr. Canvasser if it warrants a response back. There won't be
What-
any reckless calls back, but you're gonna start getting calls again.
I think that once it's presented at the regular meeting, if you would do a little caveat to that after that fact, then we'll adjust it at that point. Thank you, sir, for being here tonight, and I think we have reached the time for the business of the study session is done, and we're adjourned at, looks like 6:29.
May we excuse him now, Your Honor? You don't need him to come back, do you, for the regular meeting?
No, you could fill him in on that. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. So.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just need a couple minutes to set up for the end. Yeah. Somebody's gotta be the first one to take that step.
Frozen, cold.
Oh, no, it's gonna
Especially since I thought it was at 6 o'clock.
be this in my packet?
So
That was
Pickens
mine,
and
so
I
but you
sat
can have
there
it
for
if you like.
half
I have
an
an extra. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one is done.
Animal shelter, you should have got, you received drawings from us and they were sent to you, pictures. There they are, right there. Huge. And had them in your left hand.
What's up, John Boy?
No, I think that we're
Oh, it's kind of my
basically
heart here,
continuing
right?
in session. Yes. All right.
No. I need help getting on, up, getting off.
All right, we will call the study session of the Lincoln Park City Council to order. And what time do we got here? At 6:32. And if I could have roll call, please.
Councilpersons Breeding. Higgins.
Here.
Kelsey.
Here.
Parkinson.
Here.
Ross. Here. Salcido.
Present.
And Mayor Carnes.
Here. Now, the purpose of this study session is to, getting ahead of myself here, is to discuss the animal shelter, possible additions and such. And the person that is going to take the helm at this is our city manager, Mr. John Zeck. So, John?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, members of the City Council, in September, you approved going forward with Phase 2 on the animal shelter, which is on the grounds of the Department of Public Services building on Southfield Road. Subsequently, I was involved with looking at that shelter with the 3 department heads that have a great deal of interest in it, and that is namely the police chief, Ray Waters, the head of public services, John Kazoo, and the head of the building department, John Myers. I was there looking at that facility and seeing, for lack of better words, since it had been constructed or installed, I should say more installed than constructed, but it was installed on the site in the early part of this year and put into service, there's been a great deal of wear and tear, for lack of better words, on the building. It's a temporary kind of structure. It's not built to last for a long time. And when we were looking at Phase 2 and how we were going to connect the 2 phases together, it became very apparent that perhaps we needed to come back and bring something different to you. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to show you what we'll call an amended Phase 2. This phase will involve considerably more money than was initially discussed with you in September. We don't need you to make a money decision tonight. But what we're looking for tonight is for the council to give us some feeling for, do you want us to pursue this further and carry this discussion forward into the budget preparation for fiscal 2021, or do you want us to continue with the original Phase 2, we'll say? The only way this can financially be tackled, well, there's several ways it could be tackled, but probably the most, the way that would have perhaps the best possibility, unless somebody decided to donate a considerable amount of money to the city at this point, the best possibility would be for this to bridge 2 budget years. The money you've set aside in this budget to be combined with money to be set aside in a future budget that would be a decision made by you. The 4th person that's extremely interested in this process, besides myself, is another department head, and that is the finance director. She's been part of all of these meetings with the police chief, the building director, and the public services director, and she's concerned about the money, as I know all of you are, as are Mr. Waters, Mr. Kazoo, and Mr. Myers, and myself. So Ray Parker, who is a fine architect, I had experience with Ray prior to coming to work for you in Lincoln Park, as he's done work in Southgate, where Hennessy is based. Ray has experience with animal shelters. We've worked with him very closely to develop this plan. This plan is meant to be a long-range building that will be there for a considerable length of time, that can be utilized in a number of ways. It's flexible, and believe it or not, there's even perhaps someday Phase 3, should you want to go further. But at a minimum, we want to talk about Phase 2. Ray has drawings that he's prepared. These drawings have been worked on quite hard by the staff to review them, give him suggestions. He's made suggestions. This wasn't just a one-time drawing on a piece of paper and we all said, oh, let's go. This was multiple meetings over several weeks to come to this point. So Ray, if you'd like to take it over, I'd appreciate it, and we'll discuss the layout, the site, and then we'll get to, at some point before 7:30, we'll get to talking about money.
Will the pictures be on the screens? Do you have that for those at home?
I have-
Setting up, John?
I have display boards here.
Oh, okay.
The gentleman we'll have the pictures.
Oh, okay. I thought you were setting up a presentation. I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to make sure he had all the drawings and where he needed them so that
Oh, all right.
Don could see them from the camera.
Okay,
If
that'll
they
work.
put them here, then Don can zero in on them.
That'd be fine too. I'm new to this as far as where these things should go. And we'd like the,
Yeah, just right across there.
And he can zoom in.
we'd like the public to see as much as possible, and we'll have them here subsequently if people want to come to City Hall and take a look at them. And
Good idea.
Mayor and Council, in your packets, the drawings that you were provided with, the main one is the site plan, the overall aerial picture that shows the building location. The first attempt, what we wanted to do is save the existing building, maintain its purpose while we looked at doing phase two, which is to add on to that building. Looking at the size of the existing building and the condition of it, we knew that we needed more kennel space than what was provided in that building. We have almost doubled, if not more than doubled, the kennel spaces within the new proposed addition, which would basically butt right up against the front facade of, on the west side of the building, the front facade of the existing building, which is the more the office space or the entry point. The kennels would remain to the east. We would allow 26 kennels within. We have some larger ones for larger dogs. We have kennel runs that are off the outside of the building, so they would have guillotine doors where the dogs could be let outside and enclosed in within a fenced-in area. The fences could also be screened in. Within the kennel space itself, we also have some isolation rooms, which are required and needed if a dog is to be brought in and evaluated before it's released into the general public of the kennel space. It needs to be quarantined and checked for shots and anything else that might be affecting the dog at that point. The main concern was getting the dogs into the facility and not endangering the public around them. So on the west side of the proposed addition, we have a drive-in yard that is fenced in, and then also a garage where the truck could be pulled into the garage, the door could be shut down before the dog is ever removed from the truck. From there, it's walked into an isolation evaluation room, and then it can be taken into one of the 4 isolation kennels before, like I said, before it's released into the other areas. For the general public, off the south side of the building, we have a vestibule and a lobby and waiting area large enough for at least 2 families to come in. We also have 2 adoption rooms so that different families can be brought in to become acquainted with the animal that they're looking to rescue. The reception area, obviously with the existing building, there are no restrooms. We're providing a unisex ADA restroom in there. And then the evaluation center for the vet tech that needs to do any immunizations or anything else that are needed. And the rest of the space is basically just support for mechanical laundry and a kitchen area for the main kennel space. Each kennel is roughly 3 feet by 5 feet. And again, like I said, it has a guillotine door that can be lifted and the dog can be ushered to the outside and then brought back in. This allows for cleaning of the kennels on a more regular basis and keeps the handlers or the workers at a safe distance from those dogs as they're let outside. The solids are still need to be picked up. The rest can be hosed out. We would provide adequate water supply. The heating and cooling in this would be more of just a heat provided with a radiant fin tube heater over the top and a furnace for the office areas. And basically, we're looking at roughly 2,800 square feet for the entire building. And like I said, it abuts up to the existing like John mentioned, for phase 3, there is room for an expansion of mirroring the back wall of the kennel to almost double the amount of kennel spaces and create a cat space as well.
if John, if you or Ray have any comments you'd like to make, or John, if you have any comments you'd like to make about this floor plan, this would be a good time to do it. And from your perspective, Ray, as you are the one who supervises the workers there, and John, you've got the issue of the entrance off of Russell Street and coming in off of Lejeune, and as well as there's been discussions about a long-term goal of having a dog park to the north of this facility and how that would make sense given its location. So, and John, I think you would like to maybe present your comments about the condition of the existing building, what you've observed, as well as the kind of materials this building would have, that, so the council would understand its durability. So whichever one of you wants to go first, flip a coin, and maybe it ought to be Ray.
Well, just a question before we
Sure.
go there. With these plans and everything, has the state or the licensing body had a look at these and?
Not to this point, no. We have basically, this is conceptual. We've gone through to make sure it meets code, and it's based off the state's website for their codes and requirements
Okay.
and the other shelters I've designed in the past.
So it's based on all their guidelines, we
Correct.
just haven't had a stamp of approval?
Correct. We didn't want to go through that exercise if it was going to take more time to get through it, so.
I got you, thank you.
Through the chair, if I
Yes,
may.
ma'am.
It isn't code for the building to require air conditioning?
No, it's not. You can provide enough air exchange with exhaust fans, and heating it is all that's required.
Okay.
Yeah, through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Did I hear you say in the next phase, we could add cat rooms? There's no cat room here?
Well, some of the areas could be utilized for that. We could use one of the adoption rooms for the cat area now, but the main discussion was to utilize the existing facility, possibly for cats, and convert this to keep them more separated for dogs and cats.
So phase one would be along with part of phase two would be for cats. And then eventually, the city could grow into a more defined kind of situation involving cats, because the durability of the existing building, or phase one, is such that it will need to be replaced. And we would utilize the concrete floor of it and the facilities of it as part of phase three. But phase two does have provisions for cats, not as much, however, as you ultimately would probably like.
And with the proposed building that we're looking at for phase two, this is all concrete blocks, split face blocks, so it's more durable, and everything would have a two-part epoxy coating on it, which meets the state regulations for cleanliness and bacteria. And the existing building has a spray coating on it that eventually will wear off very quickly. And it's basically 2x2 construction, 2 inches by 2 inch wood construction. For dogs, the recommendation is masonry with an epoxy coating on them. So it's just for durability.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Question through the chair. It looks like the building butts up to it, but there's no door that you can go from one facility to the other.
It's because
Is
of
that
the,
kind of inconvenient? Because if you're going to be, you have to go outside to go, is that normal? I mean, I would assume there would be you could go like into the other portion, so you didn't have to go outside and do whatever you're going to do, then come back without, have to physically go out and not around, but just go out. Why was that? I mean, was that just, I'm sorry.
the existing building is raised off of grade, so it does not meet ADA requirements. The proposed building would. And if you try and make that connection with ramps, for every inch of rise, you have to have 12 inches of run in a ramp. And to connect the two buildings, it physically is impossible within that tight space. And not knowing the longevity of the existing building, I didn't want to cater towards that versus putting, the biggest thing is the drainage and the sanitary that has to be done for the plumbing within the kennel spaces, and making everything gravity pitched towards the sewer that it needs to. If I tried to raise the building up, it actually hurts us on that fact as well.
Okay, that explains it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ray. Ray Waters, that is.
I think Ray here's, the other Ray has covered quite a bit, but I will add that this plan actually makes the most sense for us to move forward with our shelter. We still are able to utilize our current building, and then add to the new building. We'll have all the functions and everything that we don't have with the current building. The new one will have. So it really does, and then it sets us up for the future. If we do decide to expand, if the current building does fail, then it sets us up that we can expand easily off that, and it gives us it gives all the workers everything they need out of the new building.
For the viewers at home, I know the city council is aware of it. For the viewers at home, what are some of the, in terms of your staff that staffs that building, what are some of the problems with the existing building that would be would
Well, the
be
current problems we
covered by
have
this new
obviously
building?
are, there's nowhere for the citizens to come in and see the dogs. So we have to bring them out to see them. There's no office space. So this current building will actually provide them an office space to keep all their files in and things that we have to follow up with the state with. You know, there's things that the state requires that we keep, and it's very tough with the storage areas that we have. We also don't have a whole lot of storage area for food and things for the animals. So there's a lot of stuff that this current building, or the building we're in now, doesn't have that we will have with the new building. Space is a big one. I mean, it's the hallway or the aisleway in between the cages. There's not a lot of room in the current one, where this new one would give us more room. You know, there's going to be room for adoptions, office space, people to actually come in and sit in the waiting room area. Or
You really don't have much space for quarantine right now. If
we
there's-
have no quarantine space
if,
at all.
If the dog or an animal has any kind of disease,
Right.
it's immediately
Right.
is-
So the current, this new building will actually have a quarantine area with its separate ventilation system. So that will work out great. Now, all the, you know, the mayor had asked about this has already been sent to the state. It hasn't, but I know dealing with the state, with the specs for the current building, that this, all the stuff is already meeting everything that they require. And then obviously, as we go forward, we'd, you know, include them in it. But this is pretty early right now.
Would there be a possibility of us taking animals from other communities in the future? If we
I think at some point it could, if you go to your phase 3, you're expanding it quite a bit, and then you can add more.
But currently, this just meets our needs then.
This will be our needs. We're full almost all the time now.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, Ray.
Yes, sir.
John Myers, building official. I'm really only here to speak about the existing building that's present. It has not been on the ground in a full year as of we speak to this day. We have a number of continued problems maintaining it. Holes have been torn into it by the existing of a full house and the animals. I know in the short winter that it was in already, we had some water damage or freezing damage because of the way the plumbing system has to be operating in this. We don't have a complete sanitational P-trap system for every kennel space, and so therefore water has a tendency to lie in this long tubular structure, the way it's set, without being underground, or in an insulated barrier. So when we finally get a chance to see the entire cycle of a winter this year, we might find some of those continued problems. Before we got to the major change of weather, we've already are continuing to wrestle with guillotine door issues. Probably a combination of two things. The walls are only 1.5 inches thick. They're not full studded. That means that wall in temperature changes from the outside to the inside, flexes, so does the door jams. And so therefore you have more of a challenge for people to operate the guillotines in it. So we're going to struggle with that a little bit. The building as it exists presently also does not meet any standards for insulation and temperature control by the way it's built and designed at this point. And so I know between Hennessy, DPS, and myself, we've all given suggestions of the longevity of it, and I think the largest suggestion was between 3 and 4 years. I'm going to give you closer to about 1.5, maybe 2, if you put money into maintaining it, because you'll have to. We've already had to maintain it, and we haven't been in it a year. And since the uniqueness of the animals that we bring in have a tendency to be more aggressive than most, and it's a full house, it allows that building, being built out of lumber, being built out of only a 3/4 or 7/16 inch flooring with subsurfaces over top of them. Same with the inside walls. They're not a hard, durable finish, and so animals have a tendency to be more aggressive and continue to damage the building as a principal structure.
Thank you, John. John Kazoo, you want to give us a hand here with the issue about people coming into the building to check on animals, et cetera, and what they're dealing with in terms of the site?
Presently, that particular site is an aggregate parking lot. A building like this should have some, either a bituminous or a concrete structure underneath it for parking. Let me go backwards and touch on some of the things that Mr. Meyer has already touched on. We haven't been through a cold winter cycle yet. We basically started the operation in late winter, early spring, and I've got reservations on the water system because with the present facility, there is only heat at the far east end of the building, and the area that was slated for an office is where the water's at. And we don't have any heat up there, so we're hoping we don't have a real cold winter. Some of the other problems that we have initially run into are with the guillotine door system. The wall sections won't really support that. Some of the other items are, we've already experienced when the building initially started operation, some freeze cycles with the sanitary system. But it is a challenge. We're going to have to give the inbound citizens a hard surface, and that would be required by any inbound building in the city. Absent that, I think rest of the team has already touched on a lot of the items that I would have brought up.
Thank you, John. I would like to go back to, and then take all of your questions. I'd like to go back to the point that was made by the police chief as well as Ray Parker when he was discussing the building. And that is currently when the animal control officers bring in a dog, the dog is unloaded from the vehicle outdoors. And then it's got to be shepherded indoors. The plan as you have in front of you and on the drawing, you'll see where the vehicle can be pulled into a garage type facility. The doors can be shut. The doors within the building can be closed, and the officer can get the animal out of the vehicle, and it's confined inside. It cannot get away. We've had some issue with that. And this is a safety issue for not only the handler, but for the employees that are in the building, as well as the other animals in the building, and perhaps anybody that goes there too, thinking about adoption or going there to pick up their dog because their dog got away and we picked it up and that sort of thing. So that's and we have had some of our workers that have been injured. Knock on wood, it hasn't been serious injuries, but in a facility like this, in tight quarters, that's where, well, in any kind of building you can have an accident, and we're not hoping for that. But we liked what Ray was thinking about there regarding the way that would be handled and his experience with this sort of facility. Ray, if you have any closing comments, feel free, and then we'll take questions from the council about the design, as well as we'll have some discussion about money.
I just wanted to touch base on like John Kazoo and his comments about concrete, and I've provided for at least one ADA parking space with an access aisle next to it that leads to a sidewalk to the front lobby. So you would have a concrete parking area for someone to get handicap accessible to the building. And then we would actually do concrete for the approach and the yard where the truck would come in, so they weren't turning around and gravel, backing in and out. The rest, we were looking at utilizing the existing slab from the existing building in the future, if needed, and just providing a walkway that could be accessible from the rear kennel area of the proposed building to a door on the other building, and we would ADA ramp that, as you mentioned, with the different heights. That's how we could accomplish that. And then the rest to the east would all be gravel parking to be done in the future. And like was mentioned, to the north of the site is a large open green space that we are looking to incorporate into a large and small dog park area. Having a facility like this that could issue licenses and everything else that's necessary for a dog park and kind of police it as well, it's kind of keeping everything in one location. So if there's any other questions I can answer.
Yes, question through the chair. why wouldn't you just take the gravel out of there and either put asphalt or something else? That sounds like it would be waiting for somebody. I mean, if we're gonna do all this, and I looked at the money and all that, it sounds to me that you should just go ahead and pave it or make it, accessible to anybody who gets out, who maybe is an ADA sticker, but still gets out, and, I mean, they're going through gravel to get to a public building. That's kind of, was that ever considered, or is it the cost factor?
It was the cost factor.
Okay, because most of the kennels that I see, they don't have gravel parking lots. They have either asphalt or concrete. And I was looking at that, and that was one of the questions I had, because, if you're gonna do it right. We already went through this once with the temporary, and I could see where that got us, okay? And I understand it's money, but it's money whether you do it now or later. It's the old story, And if you do it now, it's all incorporated. It all connects everything. Everything is done, so everything drains the right way in. Nobody comes in and complains about, well, you did it wrong when you put the cement in, so now when I put the asphalt, it won't drain. It gets away from all those issues, okay? The last question I got is, goes back to Councilwoman Ross's question. Are you sure that building won't get hot enough? I know what you're talking about, the exhaust fan, but hot enough in the way that it beats down on there, being a concrete, where it shouldn't have some, at least in the reception area?
We can do
some kind of way of, if it does, we can put something in there?
Yeah, we would have a mini split system in any of the office areas. So you would have a furnace with, it's not AC, but it is, it's like a heat pump
Okay.
in the actual office area, but the kennels themselves would have nothing except for the exhaust air is bringing, it's thermostat controlled. Once it hits a temperature, the air is changed out of the room, and it cycles quite often. So it's enough to create a cooling effect as the air is being drawn out of the building.
Okay, because through the chair, I was just wondering, because, again, if we're gonna do it right, I don't wanna get to the point where, and again, it's my opinion anyways, is that if you're gonna have somebody work in there and you're gonna have animals in there, you definitely wanna be comfortable on any case, because of whether it's cold or hot, and that way you have the option of turning that air on because it's there. If you don't wanna use it, then that's fine, but it's plumbed, it's there, and it's on, because things always change, and it's a lot more expensive. I know as an architect, you probably know more than me, to add things afterwards than to include it in the initial thing and say, well, we're planning for the future, and hey, you never know, and it's not gonna be that much more if we include the heat pump or whatever.
You're absolutely right. It's easier to move it with an eraser than as a sledgehammer later.
Thank you, that's all I got, thanks.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I agree with Councilman Kelsey, and I've said it before, if you do it right the first time, you don't have to go back to it. This first dog pound was sort of an emergency situation, and I wasn't happy with it when it happened, but now this looks good. I mean, it's a mortar and block structure. The dogs aren't going to chew their way through the walls. The old dog pound we had back there before was concrete. I remember going back there many times as a DPS employee to do something for the dog pound. And this, I think this is gonna fill the bill. If we have to add on to it, you're gonna take the existing building out and add back in there, is what you're saying?
Yeah, we would remove the existing building, and I have one. So this is the end of the existing building, or phase two. I would mirror the whole building over so that this area becomes this area, becomes a large cat room.
Okay. Is there enough room between where the garage area is? Is there enough room between that and a fence for the neighbors on June Street?
Yes.
How much footage is there?
There's we're actually within the easement line of the DPS yard property.
I know where it's at.
It's,
The house on Lejeune in Russell.
yes,
How far back is that garage door from the people's backyard?
at least 40 feet, 50 feet or more.
I'll have to go look at that. I don't think there's that much room there, but I'm sure you've measured it. I'll have to take a look.
I have,
Thank you.
if I may,
Yes, go
through
ahead.
the chair. This is a beautiful design. It's lovely. I think this would meet all of our needs. But it costs $500,000. We're in the process of determining whether we can build a court building and a police building. I don't want us to go back into receivership. I think we need to really, really take into consideration, I would love to get wall-to-wall carpeting in my living room, but I don't have the money for it, so we're going to live with this carpet. The Band-Aid, the current dog pound was just a Band-Aid. Anyone who went and looked at it knew it was not going to take care of our problem, but we could not house our animals anyplace else. No one else would let us come there. So I realized the need, but, I mean, money-wise, people, we don't want another EM here. We don't want to go into receivership again. I mean, I would think that housing prisoners and court facilities kind of puts it's a little higher on my scale anyway. So we'll do whatever, of course, whatever the majority thinks. This is beautiful. It's a pipe dream. And I realize that we need to have something for these animals. But it just, I'm like the finance director. It just scares me. This much money. I mean, we've just got new phone system. You know, we just bought new equipment for the DPS and stuff. I just don't want us to cross the line to where 2 years from now the treasurer comes back and says, what have you done with the money? You know, what have you spent it on? What were your priorities? So I just think we need to take a breath, consider all this, but $500,000 sure would put a large chunk of that police building, attach it to a court building. That's my take.
Through the chair.
Just a second. Mr. Zach, what was the amount that we have budgeted this year? Lisa, would you be able to touch on that?
Yes.
It's actually a combination of funds that we had left from the original budget for the animal shelter. Totals about $200,000. We can probably scratch a little bit more from unspent funds, but beyond that, it's gonna come down to more of like a financing option, because to come up with an additional $300,000 is just not feasible in 1 year. Now, if we planned for it a little bit more long-term, it may be something that we can do. We can set aside some funds for it, but.
That's why I indicated that it would require bridging from one fiscal year into the next. Not looking for you to give us a green light, we'll say, on spending that kind of money tonight, but to, I guess, for lack of better words, bring the reality forward that the existing building is failing, no fault of your own for putting it there and paying for it, but it was not a long-term building. And it's perhaps coming apart faster than even we all thought it would be. And so you could see what a long-term building would cost. And if you were to begin this project this coming summer, you would have the money from this fiscal year plus some money that you could put aside in your next fiscal year in the budget, and you'd be able to get going with this. These are estimates at this point, but this is what we felt you should have so you could compare what's been proposed and now this proposal to see what would be your direction. And we can visit this again in February and when we're in March when the budget is coming forward.
Question for the chief. While you're coming up here, has the situation changed in which other communities have facilities for Lincoln Park dogs, or are we still in the same circumstances we were when we built the?
Yeah, I don't think anything's changed yet. We haven't approached anybody about joining again, but the main reason why we got kicked out of Southgate, Allen Park, Wyandotte, Taylor, and Rouge didn't want us is because of the aggressive animals we have, and that hasn't changed.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can approach them again and see if we can join with them again.
Now, in the facility that we have, and this not necessarily for you, Chief, but probably for city manager here, is there more like a Plan B to look at? Obviously, we have this, and this is what we would like to have, but as was suggested, maybe it's not in our best interest to do that, that type of facility. Is there a possibility for a secondary look, maybe a little bit smaller.
That would, sure, that would be, again, we're looking for what your input in this as far as like what you would like us to continue to do. We could look at shrinking the building and shrinking what we'll call the amended Phase 2 to less space. But it's per square foot, is, you know, when you look at building a house or an office building or whatever. Certainly, we can take the money that is in the budget now and try to improve the building that sits there through spending some of it. And then we can, you know, plan for another prefab type building that would be utilized.
Now,
But-
we've heard of 3 department heads here. Now, is it the opinion of all 3 that this is what is necessary, that this is the recommendation, that what they want to see in place? For the, okay,
We would not have brought this forward if there had been any dissension, but we certainly appreciate the council's concern, and we can take a.
well, obviously, if it's necessary and deemed necessary, and the 3 department heads are telling us that this is what is required, because that is not going in, that has to be taken into consideration.
Right,
That's why I wanted that. We had Councilwoman Ross?
Yes, if I could, Your Honor.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be, this is ideal, right? Do we know of a prefab building that would be comparable to this?
No,
It's nothing.
No.
I didn't think so.
no. I mean, there's prefab buildings out there, and you could get them bigger and smaller, and for instance, you could try to go with some kind of, like an insulated steel building. Like, you know, they have different names. Some people call them Butler buildings, some call them whatever. You could have this sort of thing. But those present some issues and problems. This is certainly not a palace or grand building. It's cinder block, it's concrete, it is epoxy paint for cleanliness, and, you know, there's no, as has been pointed out, there's a furnace and there's a plumbing system, but there's not air conditioning. And so we certainly didn't go too far in terms of making it too grand. You know, it'll be stainless steel kinds of things, so you can have proper health issues and all. But it's not a fancy building. I hope someday that this community has a very nice courthouse and police building, as the council president has talked about, and I know all of you have been talking about it. Because you need it. You need a new courthouse, and you need a new police building. You've outgrown both facilities, particularly now too with you know, the 3 communities sharing the same court, and et cetera. But there isn't a prefab type building that this could fit. We could, as you know, visit with some of our neighbors to see if we could try to work with them further to stretch this existing building you have out. And but admittedly, the reasons that were previously mentioned, you know, there were some pretty rough dogs that were here, and they were causing our neighbors to wish that we'd move on, and so we did the best we could.
Right. If I could, Your Honor?
Okay.
If I just want to add that in doing what we're doing today, I feel like we're throwing our money away because we know that the existing building isn't working for us. So we really need to consider all our possibilities for moving forward with Phase 2.
Thank you.
Through the chair,
Yes, sir.
go back again, if we bring the building department back in-house, it'd save about $250,000 a year. So that would pay for this dog building. So that would be a simple way to figure out where the money's coming from.
I got a
Yes, sir, go ahead.
question through the chair. I haven't heard anything about the upkeep for this building. In other words, the cost of the heating, the air, the maintenance. I mean, we just talked about the structure being built, right? Brand spanking. We haven't talked about anything other than if we build it, that's what it costs. But we're not talking about the cost of maintaining the building. You know, in other words, the utility cost, the cost of manning it because it's a larger building, so there'd be more people involved. The maintenance issues because it's a larger building, so it will have issues eventually. So there's more associated than just the cost of building something. Unfortunately, I've been involved where they built multi-million-dollar buildings. The next day, the heat didn't work. And that's just the way it goes. I mean, stuff happens, so. And I didn't see any, and you wouldn't do that as an architect, but I haven't seen any cost figures to what it would cost to run the building. You know
No,
what
I
I'm saying?
haven't, we haven't
'Cause you
planned
don't-
for any life cycle
Yeah,
costs or
there's
anything
no,
like
you know,
that.
like the manpower or lady power, or whatever you want to call it, plus the fact that everything has a, you know, you have to put the furniture, everything else that goes into this building. It's not
Correct.
just, you know, the building, so. The other issue, I guess, that I'll say is that unfortunately, we got thrown out of every other dog place, cat place, whatever, and that's what caused us to have the problem we did, okay? And unless, as a city, we're not gonna do it, take dogs and cats, then that solves our problem. Unfortunately, we do, and we gotta have a place for it. I have to agree with the council president on one issue. Unfortunately, we have a lot of mandates. We got the water line mandates that we have that's gonna cost millions and millions of dollars a year that the state is not paying. We're gonna pay for that. We had the school, and I'll steal Mr. Kudrak's fire for a little bit. We have the school thing that we're paying for. We're gonna have the new court and police, which we didn't put the two other courts in there, the state did, but they didn't give us anything. This is have a nice day, we'll see you. And, you know, so there's a lot of stuff that's coming, but as a city, if we're gonna provide certain services like the court and the police and all that, there's a cost factor for it. They're not free. We tried to do the issue with the temporary, and I can see where we got us in that one. I mean, that really, and we had no choice because they threw us out and they weren't taking them. So we couldn't put the animals on the street, so to speak. We had to put them someplace. So unless we find some kind of way of addressing some of these issues, I have to agree, we're not only going to have an issue with the money, but we're going to have a lot of unhappy citizens paying a lot of taxes for all these mandated issues that we didn't have the money for way back when, or the issue where the state made changes to our environment. And that's just the way it is. So what I don't like is doing things twice. And I can see where that got us, and I have to agree with Councilman Ross. We assumed, and that's a bad word, that there were other issues with that building, and unfortunately, nobody come up and told us that. We were told the building will work. And I remember Matt, the last city manager, saying that if we had a proper building, it would be a $500,000. I remember him sitting there at that chair where Mr. Zick is saying that, and we didn't have the money back then, and that's why we went to the kennel, supposedly portable kennel. So I think there is a lot of issues that we have to consider, and I don't know what the solution is, but some of these issues are going to be timely. They're going to come up whether we like it or not. When the building fails, there's no place to put the animals, plain and simple. And at that point in time, you got to do something, whether we go in with another city or we decide to do something or whatever. But somewhere along the line, we got to do something because it's been testified or said from some of the department heads, this thing we got is on its last legs anyway. So, and you're right, it's a lot of money. I don't disagree. Court building's a lot of money. The school bond was a lot of money. I can go on. Lead lines are going to be a lot of money, but you got to do them. So, thank you, and thank you for the explanation. I appreciate you explaining the answers to my questions. It makes me more comfortable. At least I know why. I thank you for that. Through the chair, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, Mr. Zach, do you have?
Mr. Mayor and members of the council will take all this under advisement. We will we're obviously getting to work now on the budget. The capital projects are being proposed by the department heads, and we'll be looking at, you'll be getting a report soon from Plant Moran on the 18-19 audit. That'll be coming up at your next meeting. As we head into the new year, we will be working with you on trying to figure out how we're going to cover not only this project, if possible, but all of these other ones. And we have more to discuss with you in the near future about utilization of human resources, and there's a report on your desk about that tonight.
Are we still in the process of the distressed cities grants?
We're going to be applying for some distressed city money, yes.
So is this a possibility?
This could be a possibility, but we've been looking at lots of water and sewer issues that have come before the city without, funds from the state.
I gotcha, but I would, on the,
Right,
throw that into the mix also.
Right.
As a possibility.
Right.
Of the way that we could get it covered, who knows? Okay, nothing further from that, so then, there being no further business, we will adjourn it at 7:18 PM.